We are Econet, an investigatory community with Steph Macurdy, Montijn van Loo, Andrej Bugajev, Jere Northrop around the world. And we're going to update each other on what we've been investigating. Who'd like to go first?
Sure, I'll kick it off. So, I am accepted into the Models of Consciousness conference in Copenhagen. And that means I'll be going to Copenhagen in October, and I'll be working on a presentation to present there. That is exciting. I'm really happy that I've made myself understandable enough for the academic community. So that's really nice to feel. Um, I do feel that it was interesting. I made that paper to kind of part my ways with that whole research of consciousness. And I just wanted to have myself, I wanted to have like a strict on it, like, okay, now I'm done with it. But now it seems the investigation hasn't stopped, and I'll be presenting it there. But besides that, I'll be focusing now a lot also on morality. I'm focusing a lot of activism right now in the Netherlands. So working with somebody on a podcast. I'm working on a manifest. I am working with somebody on a news channel, which is kind of like ground news in America. I'm not sure if Jerry knows about it, ground news, but it's kind of a news aggregator, which shows, or perhaps Steph knows it, a news aggregator, which is able to give you an overview of the different ways news talk about certain events to combat polarization. But now we're going to have a different kind of thing in the Netherlands as well, and we're going towards that. And I'm working on also kind of an international academic kind of petition as well, so that I may also present that at that conference. I think it's a very good way to not only get a united front in how consciousness science should be done, but also in how what kind of stance, metapolitical stance academia should have to especially face this growing polarization, which is, I think, really destroying a lot of societies. So that is like the big main targets, and I feel quite confident in the gender investigation of philosophy and science, and free will and God. Those are more like on the sides. So that is a kind of an update.
And I want to congratulate you. Well, again, first of all, on the model of consciousness, that it's exciting that you'll be there. I'm still waiting to hear if they accepted my poster, and then it would be fun to meet you. But also to congratulate you if I think you told me that you've been accepted to a master's degree where you can work on your ethical
Oh,
theory. Is that correct? Or
I know the professor, and I'm only doing it not to academically ground the view of morality. So
Mhm.
that's really the theoretical side. I want to get a master, like a 1 year. I want to do that as my master thesis. So that's the reason and it's good. It's good to do it. I'm also doing I have to finish my econometrics master thesis as well. So I'll be studying for 1.5 years still.
Mhm. Okay, very good. So that's a good update. Who else would update us what we've been up to these last 2 weeks?
Go. I met with active inference and free energy principle scientist Maxwell Ramstead. You guys know him?
Just a little bit. Hmm.
I know him. I like his papers.
So I've been chatting with him a bunch, and Andrius, he's aware of your work through the Kuai Chi controller, because we were talking about active inference, and yeah, I think he's a really interesting person, and it's gotten me again fired up about the free energy principle, and the math of it, and that I think he also had some things to say about the math that showed up in the first active inference textbook that was used in the Active Inference Institute. So I
Hmm.
think Andrews, like, he agrees or understands that there's potentially some problems with the math
Hmm.
um, side of things, but
In
he
this book,
seems, yeah.
I can throw this away now.
So no, no,
Well,
but he was understanding of my situation, I guess, or how to.
I don't think I got into the specific details, but he definitely saw the report.
Mhm.
There's an
Okay, well
there's
that's
another.
good. So that's it. That's interesting that because he's He's an important thinker in the active inference world. So,
Yeah.
and so, okay, maybe just to say, I kind of interrupted. So you've been talking to him, and you're making me excited about the free energy principle again to think more about it.
Yeah, he just thinks about it in a very pure way, and his intuitions are really helpful. Um, and he's kind of helping me see something in Wolfram's work
Hmm.
in the relationship between the observer and the second law.
Hmm.
So that's what I've been working on. Just kind of having a conversation with him basically every day for the past week and a half. And so I've read a bunch of his papers, and I think it's worth, um, you know, just I wouldn't say like what specific paper is worth reading, but I think if you are aware of him, he's a good person to be aware of. And if you could talk to him, and maybe bring him in here for, like one of our future meetings and just kind of,
Well, and just to say, like, I think he knows, the free energy principle, well, as you know, like super deeply, like in a way that I just, am not, I don't know. So I think, and he has like intuition for it and kind of like understands the math behind it and all these things. So it's really good that you have that connection. And it's nice that he appreciates Stephen Wolfram. Montijn.
Uh, Generally, I'm excited to also meet him. I also have a bit of personal history with him, even though he doesn't know, but from our side, which is that there was a time in which I was very confident in my work, which is astropsychics, but his paper, which is a mathematical perspective on neurophenomenology, if you know that paper, but maybe perhaps you don't, but that kind of killed, made me bankrupt, made me realize, oh shit, I cannot ignore this theory anymore because they seem to hold the answers to the questions I was asking myself, and they have a much more rigorous treatment of that, which I just could not surmount to. So that really was a humbling paper. I could just send you in the chat if you are interested in.
thank you.
I also know, and because of that, because of that paper, which he contributed to, I really started to take active inference and free energy principle serious. So that was really the insight that started, okay, I cannot ignore this theory for much longer. And then I really went above, read along a lot of kind of different authors. And I noticed that Ramstead, and especially contrasting to Carl Friston, is much more philosophically inclined. I really feel that Carl Friston, just because the gentleman he is, says, well, the philosophers and me, we're brothers in arms. We fight for the same battle or something. But he doesn't really, he really just resides his analysis to the statistical domain, of the mathematical, physical domain. And I think Ramstead is much more trying to also, like many others, like I know Seth and Jacob Howie, get that philosophical intuition to predictive processing or active inference. So I really appreciate his mind, and I'm happy to see that you guys are bonding quite well, like in terms of interest and passions, and I would love it to make him also reflect on how I use active inference as the basis for my philosophy. For example, in morality, for example, in consciousness science, because essentially you could say that the paper I sent at the conference is, well, we have kind of the same ambition, but we have a really different approach to. So I'm curious to see how we relate. Yeah, no, I think that will be a very fruitful conversation. So yeah, keep us updated.
Yeah. Who else would go next? Andrej, maybe?
Well, I'm enjoying seeing guys doing some activity on their some major basis and grounded, and I'm a little bit even jealous when Montaigne has the ability to focus his main power, yes, and his main whole mind on these things. But on the other hand, I am in situation when I have a lot of investigations, a lot of science, but it is different. So I have, it's like, how can it be said? It's like multitasking, yes, or
Well, you're a
um,
docent, like I think it would be like an assistant professor in Vilnius Technical University, and you're working on in mathematics modeling department. So you're working on all kinds of mathematical modeling projects, right? Writing papers and.
yeah, yes, yes. And I have right now we have 4 or something like that investigations frozen because there is summertime, yes. And
Mm.
during summertime, everyone and right now many guys are waking up and drawing me into these meetings, into different projects and so on. So it's hard to keep up. On the other hand, I feel good there. So as long
In terms
as
of,
I will have,
yeah,
I
in terms of your questions on like the meaning of life and on how to live and on
yeah,
self-identity,
yeah, yeah. And
have
I
you
don't
thought
have
about that or?
any,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. But what I want to say that I don't have any active projects other than ours.
Oh, good.
So,
I mean,
so
that's,
yeah. So it is in the frozen, in the frozen state right now, or something like that. Nevertheless, the logic everywhere is very similar. When you model, we are trying right now to model actually this. Uh, it's project like human-centered AI for MRO maintenance and repair for aircraft and so on and so on. So we are pushing on these topics, but it is very connected. How we should approach the people, how we should find compromises to have both in technology and this consciousness and conscious minds, conscious beings being involved into these technologies. So this AI, the era of AI, says that we're very in fragile point of bifurcation when AI assistant can magically become not assistant anymore, but we will become something like appendix near to
Mhm.
AI. So then, what does it mean our consciousness then? Yes, so that's an important question, and I see when we talk about these things, I see it is mirroring in all different activity, even in very different projects. I see the same questions raised, but from different perspective, or more from application focused perspective, something like what Jiri was talking 2 weeks ago. When we have an application, when we have a situation when we must do something and some problems are very related to philosophical questions. So I'm here right now. That's all I want to say.
Okay.
And
Okay.
actually, yes, so that's it.
Thank you. And so why don't we then go to Jerry?
Okay, I've been working on trying to get back into this economic business community. So I've got a bunch of things going out. I don't have much in the way of responses back yet. I will have a pretty detailed summary for you here in 2 weeks. So it's pretty interesting, but the classical types of funding things we don't qualify for so much, but there are lots of other alternatives. So anyway, I can talk about that in a couple of weeks. Relative to the rest of the discussion you're having, I continue to kind of obsess about this notion of probability
Mm-hmm.
and how people define probability, whether it's a frequency function or a set of inferences based on a hypothesis. Both of those lead to an involvement of language. And I
Mm-hmm.
see that as being a peculiar kind of possibly Achilles heel in that kind of analysis is how can you really talk about probabilities without dealing with the foundations of language? So I don't have any answers on that, but I continue to fuss around with it, and we'll go. I think ultimately it becomes a challenge to all the computational procedures that end up using probabilistic formulations, and whether you can represent that sort of stuff computationally, or whether you have to fall back on some kind of linguistic language foundation too. So anyway, not much to report, but hopefully more in a couple of weeks.
And then maybe I'll just add that every day I carve out at least like half an hour or an hour to work on the deep philosophical foundations of the whole wondrous wisdom. Let's say all these structures, like where's it all spinning out of? So making good progress on that. I could share like a map of the big picture. And also I work on the Bott Periodicity, trying to understand that and how it could be used to model certain aspects of like the divisions of everything. What maybe just to take what Jere said about probability and relate it to something I've been thinking more about. You're familiar with the three minds, and so these are like filters by which we get, by which we experience the world, let's say, right? But there's also like the zero filter, and which is kind of like to say, like, not experience life through our mind, but rather be stimulated by the world outside. So it's like when a child goes out to play, right? Like, child doesn't know what to do with themselves. They just know if I go out and play, something will happen, right? Or if I, check my email, maybe I'll get news, or if I watch the news, or if I watch television, like this idea of external simulation. And I think when Jere mentioned probability, why do we deal with probabilities? Maybe as a question, like why? See, probabilities are kind of like modeling that external stimulation where we don't know exactly what's going to happen. There's a possibility of what could happen. And then so we can start to talk about that and model that interaction with the real world. So that being like one option. And then the other three options being to say, well, focus on what you're actually experiencing, which would be like, either through the unconscious or the conscious or the consciousness. So another example which comes up in my art project is this Gaon of Vilna. He was absolutely obsessively devoted to studying the Torah, and he would just close all the windows and just, never leave his room and just study the Torah and memorize it and think about it. And so he used this method of PaRDeS, which is basically those four levels that, you can take a statement in scripture, you can just look at it face value, what is it saying? But you can look at it for some kind of inspirational value, like maybe the different letters, what they could be cues for, or etc. Then you could look at it kind of like in a conceptual or legalistic or comparative, like, how does it fit in logically? What is it trying to say? And then you could look at it some kind of very deep level, like metaphysically, like, well, what's this whole significance of this? What is it actually meaning? So there's these different levels, kind of like whether, what, how, why. And so in the idea of, well, we have this horribly desecrated cemetery and we want to restore it or represent it in some ways, you can restore it on face value, but just rebuild some tombstones, but you can restore it on all these other spiritual levels as well. So just to say that zeroth level, and trying to model that and understand that, I think it kind of speaks to what Jere just said. So maybe then the question is like, any topics that suggest for ourselves that we would like to talk about today, or would we like to maybe ask about this whole shared reality and focus on that? How are you inclined?
I have a couple questions.
Please.
Andrius, one question for you was, does Wondrous Wisdom, is it an ergodic or a non-ergodic kind of flow? Like, can you freely visit all states of the eightfold, kind of the cycles, or in the various breakdowns of how Wondrous Wisdom works? There's nothing that would prevent movement into any part of the system. Is that
I don't
is that
think.
right?
I think no. I think it's I mean, it's intended as a descriptive language, so it's modeling like, what we experience, and I think it's highly constrained. So like, let's say I'm experiencing the matter of existence, then the idea is that, well, I need two perspectives. I need to say, well, maybe that chair exists or not. It's like free will, it's like optional. But if it does exist, it does exist. It is the way it is. It's like fate. So if and only if, like, if I have to divide everything into perspectives, I'm going to have that structure. It means that I'm thinking existence, or it means, and vice versa. Now, if I want to shift away from that, you see, I would either reflect with a perspective, or a perspective on a perspective, or a perspective on a perspective on a perspective. So I would shift like to one of the three minds. So instead of the twosome, it would become the threesome or the foursome or the fivesome. So like going from existence, it'd be like participation, the threesome, or knowledge would be like the foursome, or decision making in space and time would be the fivesome. So you kind of have these different steps that you can take as you, let's say, go through what issue you're concerned with. So this is just one example of type of constraint. So there's all these constraints, and trying to map them out. That's what makes it interesting scientifically, in the sense it's like you're actually describing, modeling the constraints that we live in, if it's correct. So that's the intent.
So when you've bumped up into, this or that, the two perspectives, who adds the third? Like, what would get you out? That state of that question of asking for a perspective on a perspective on a perspective is always available to you. It is always available in the
Yeah, that's a
system.
question, like which one, yeah, so which one wins, right, of those three options? I don't know how to say that. I don't even have an idea about that. But just to try to formulate, like, this is three paths. It's kind of like in physics, right? Like you take a point in space, maybe there's a particle at that point. It's got three directions it can go in, and maybe any combination, but it goes infinitesimally in any direction. It's constrained. It doesn't just hop over anywhere, right? Like, it has to travel there, right? Like, so, it has to travel continuously, let's say, right? Like, so there are these constraints. That's what makes physics interesting, is that it's got these constraints. Things have to follow rules, right? So they just don't hop around from, although like in quantum physics, they kind of do, because it's more about probability. So, but that's trying to describe the constraints. And then you can try to say, okay, well, then why is it one over the other, etc. That's a question. And that's where this idea of these languages. So there's a language for each of the minds has a language. That language would explain maybe how it's coming into, relevance, and what it's generating and stuff. So like, how do things come to matter would be for the language for the unconscious, but how does meaning arise would be the language for the conscious, or how do events happen would be the language for the consciousness. So each of those is kind of like telling its own story, and they could be happening in parallel. I mean, because all these three minds are functioning in parallel. So I think but they're all intertwined. So just trying to untangle that and model that.
If they are capable of running in parallel, then it would, to me, suggest that there's no bound on, you only have this processor capable of doing one of those parallel movements. You have an infinite processor of doing three
Or you have
movements
parallel
simultaneously.
processors, in a sense. I think, yeah, there's some kind of parallel.
And to me, that
Reading.
would suggest that it's ergodic, and that's helpful to me because it just says that there are constraints, but there's not a constraint on where you can explore first.
Where you must explore first. Right?
Where you must explore first.
I don't know, but I kind of, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, but I would suspect that there's some kind of parallel nature, and that may give us part of like our freedom. Is that it kind of like, how are these
Okay.
things? Yeah.
And sorry, one question for Jerry, or I guess maybe a statement to prompt you, Jerry, is you brought it back to language, and in my words, what I think you're saying is that there's always an encoding and a decoding, and that's deeply related to Markov blankets, because you're never going to fully access what the encoding was, but you'll only have access to the decoding in the active and sensory states. So when you said it always comes back down to language, and there's going to be a problem for interpretation or understanding, I think it's because across a channel, there's always just going to be an encoding and a decoding. And so it would be, you could match that to the language, but I think there will always be imprecision. So does that land for you as well?
In a way, yes. I kind of see that resolving, though, in terms of, instead of looking at it as a Markov chain or any of that sort of stuff, you look at it as more emotion. It's you have something that's there without the process. You have a feeling or a resolution or what have you.
But to communicate the feeling,
Well,
not in words, but in deeper form or in a higher capacity, like there's a channel between us, and we could layer signals on that channel, but the maximum capacity that you can send across the channel is like the entropy of the channel system. And there's just not going to be pure 100% signal sent and received.
well, again, look at this in terms of the complex numbers or the quaternions or the octonians, where you don't have a specific answer. You have a pattern of what it could be. With complex numbers, it's one of two, more or less. With quaternions, it's one of 3 or 4. With octonians, it's one of 7. But there's no real way to say, yeah, you can quantitatively connect these, or you can computationally connect these. Is that how we really function? I mean, it's back to when you make any kind of decision or reaction, there's no process of running chains or probabilities or analysis. It's bang, it's there. You have it or you don't. And so it goes to a way of consciously experiencing complex numbers or octonians, something like that. I don't know if that makes any kind of sense at all, but that's back to how do we on an everyday functional level deal with this stuff. In the math, it really doesn't apply in a certain sense.
Well, I think what I hear you talking about kind of brings to mind the reference problem, that Montain's shared with us. And Jerry, when you talk about like the complex numbers or the quaternions or the octonians, there's 2 aspects to that. You tend to focus maybe on the one that's discrete, so like complex numbers are 2-dimensional and quaternions are 4-dimensional, octonians are 8-dimensional. But the other part of it is that, well, but each of those dimensions has a possible number, like a real number that could be, it could encode any probability from 0 to 1 or any number from 0 to negative infinity or 0 to plus infinity. Like, that's what a complex number is, right? Like it's 2 real numbers, right? So a quaternion is 4 real numbers, and they have those numbers are structured together. So like 2a plus 3i, I mean 2 plus 3i is a complex number, right? 2 plus 3i plus 4j plus 6k is a quaternion. Okay, so depending on what you mean. So then maybe in terms of communication, the point to bring up is that if you know, or if you have good reason to suspect that there's a structure or a framework lurking in the answer, which you might if you're using the three minds or whatever, or you think the other person's using three minds. If you know that there's this like in the background, you may have a good chance of remembering or recalling or understanding, what is being said. So because you have the framework, you have most of the answer already. You just need a little bit of clarity, like which one is it? Or at least you have the different ways of looking at it and then seeing, well, which of these, gives something interesting, right? So you have like different limited ways. But then but the particular value that may be attached to that, like Steph is saying, you're not going to get that value exactly. You may get something, within an error value or remarkably close. But so it's kind of like two different issues there in the question of like communicating with yourself, remembering what you just thought, or communicating with somebody other, trying to guess what are they talking about, is facilitated by having this structure of vocabulary. And so that's a way of solving attaching the reference problem.
My response to that would be what happens when you consider the case where all of the real numbers are one. So you're dealing with then just the structure and not any kind of
right. So then, then it's important to kind of state that up front, and then that's probably not the right. That would be confusing a lot of mathematicians, basically. So it's important, terminologically. Okay, so.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, any comments or any directions we'd like to go in, or what would be useful? In the end, I'm interested in this shared reality, like what would each like to contribute to that and how could that fit? Maybe I would ask Montijn, like of the things, like the reference problem is something we'd like to include, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. What else?
So I'm okay. Maybe should I just screen share that I could?
Yeah.
Just to see you, like, because I am like working a lot to make. Should I? How do I get? Should share screen like that? Yeah, because I was rebuilding in Obsidian. I'm doing everything in Obsidian. If you guys don't know Obsidian, but just to give you an idea of what it is that I'm doing, and perhaps it was also interesting for Maxwell to know, so you kind of know Ramstead and Maxwell to see what my approach is to the free energy principle and how that can extend its clarification beyond psychology to also philosophy. Is this idea, okay, so this is about the reference problem, what it is, and how active inference also kind of suggests what it is and how we should do about it. And then it's just a matter of applying it. So we apply it once to consciousness, and then we can also apply it to, here, morality. And then we can also apply it to gender and sex, and we can also apply it to free will and God. So that's kind of the basic overview. And
what are you applying to all those things?
The reference problem.
Okay, the reference problem.
Yes, and that's like one way, one path to go through to understand like the kind of journey we're taking. Mm-hmm. To say, okay, what is the reference problem? And that's essentially just asking how a philosophy becomes a science. Mm-hmm. And then understanding the reference problems, we can actually go ahead and solve these things for consciousness, morality, gender and sex, and free will. Mm-hmm. And that's one way to go about this. But the other way, in which I'm also kind of working right now, is the one about immediately the manifest, right? The activistic political change, because that's kind of a theoretical route, a philosophy to science. Mm-hmm. But there's also very demanding route is about, okay, there's a flyer. Okay, so what do we? Okay, so this is in Dutch, but essentially it says, what do we think is the case? Mm-hmm. That the moral is already widespread, but these are moral banners. Mm-hmm. And what we want is the free moral, and what we demand is centralization of information, be it in news or be it in politics, so that we can actually find the moral that survives our critique. So that is one. Then we have like an underlying manifest, and then we go to underlying the theoretical paper morality. So I just wanted to give you guys a bit of an oversight, like a visual. I'm making this visual about what I will just be working on, because as you guys maybe can imagine, each of these projects is you can spend a lot of that, spend a lot of time in this. So I'll be just doing that
So these
for.
so these three things: what we think, what we want, what we demand, and you call that with regard to the one, or
Yeah, so that's for the manifest, right? So the manifest has just this kind of structure. It
like a
is
manifesto?
literally the manifesto. Yes, the manifesto. So and I'm working with that right now in Dutch with somebody in the Netherlands.
And this is like a
Of
political manifesto, right?
yes, it asks for structural changes. So one big change is also how politics is conducted. So it's like a meta-political manifesto.
Okay,
So it's not about
meta-political manifesto.
So it's not about a kind of political direction, be it left, right, communistic, capitalistic, but rather how politics in and of itself is organized.
And so the one it refers to like the unity of humanity, the natural unity of humanity, is that or the
So what we think is that the moral is widespread, that on the left side and on the right side, people justify themselves using stories which are beautiful, right? It can be on immigration, the story of one country helping another country. It's a beautiful story, and that's what people can tell themselves. But there's also a beautiful story, the story of a country protecting themselves against deterioration. That's also a beautiful story. So these beautiful stories, they're everywhere. And what we think is that one, so the moral is widespread in this sense, but two, that these are moral banners. So yes, they are moral. Yes, they follow morals, but they hold these morals too firm as moral banners. So that when these two moral banners meet each other in a certain choice moment, be it politics, you get these unresolvable conflicts. And so that's what we think. That's the problem. And then what we want is the free moral, a moral which is not stuck to a kind of camp or to our wish thinking, but it's essentially the most that people are going to ask ourselves, what is the most fitting moral here in this choice moment? What is the most beautiful story we can tell ourselves that survives all criticism, that's most robust? So that's
I'm doing the art show in the Parliament. It was approved yesterday by the curator. So I hope it all goes well. I'm working very hard on it. And that'll be September 17th through the 23rd. And we have the opportunity to organize events there, including, let's say, like, on-site events, but it could be maybe like a Zoom connection. And that would be something to think about, is this type of workshop you want, like to try to apply, like what would that mean in our case? Because it's very much about like, it is very much about like, what are the stories that we want to be able to, that we think are beautiful, that we would like to tell?
The good start is to at least acknowledge we both wish to follow morals. So we see that we are united in desire, but then it's just our model of the world that separates us. And then that we can both investigate the question, all right, we both wish to be moral. What now is the most fitting story in this choice moment? That should be the common investigation.
So that's something we could maybe think about, like if you're, depending on your schedule and how you're available, but like at least through Zoom, let's say, to try to have that type of, you could present and then we could try to have participants go through that if they're, anyways, put that on plate. Who else? Andre, comments or? Thank you, Montijn, for, I could maybe show a little bit of my big picture. Is that fine? It won't be in Dutch, but it will be in Lithuanian. But I would like to show.
Yes.
Okay.
I just put a comment into the chat that's at some point I would like us to talk about sex and gender, so that it seemed like potentially a reference, we can dig into the reference problem a bit more tangibly with a particular example that, Montijn, you've indicated is very important to you, and it seems to be a topic widespread enough that everybody has an opinion on it. So
do you want to say more about that, Steph, and maybe Montijn reply?
I just wanted to put it out there as something I would like to talk about. Andrius, if you wanted to share, I didn't want to interrupt there.
Okay. Okay, then I'll let's see if I can share this.
Yeah, just a quick comment on Steph. I do think, just like morality is, I think, an urgent science, that we know what it is we're talking about, just so the same agenda. Because yes, indeed, a lot of conflict arises because we don't know what it refers to. Just to give you a quick, in the 3 lines, what my take is on gender, at least what the consequences are of solving the reference problem in gender, what it concretely implies for how we as a government should provide transgender care, trans care, is that I do not believe what a lot of people believe, that, or like some believe, that body dysphoria is caused by a wrong belief, nor by a wrong body, rather by societal friction. And it means it can be learned from both ways, from the individual, helped by society. And that underlies our dysphoria with our body and with the language. So that is a very concrete, and it also depends on rebus. I'm not sure if you know rebus, relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. So that's also in the predictive processing, active inference account on how psychedelics influences our brain, and that it's able to increase plasticity and able to relearn and unlearn those deeply associations you've made as a transgender, as your body as an enemy. Because, you know, your body tries to explain, why do I feel societal friction? Why do I feel this pain and I cannot be who I want to be? And you see your own body as cause. So you get to really link, okay, my body is the enemy and the other body is the salvation, is release of this pain. So it really ties into this active inference work as well. So that's just a kind of a short overview.
Very good. So we'll have that something we can think about. So why don't I give an introduction to what I think about, and this is based on the Wondrous Wisdom, which has a bottom-up side to it, and also this is the top-down side to it. So the bottom-up is just to notice, like, you know, I collect examples of the 3 minds. I've got maybe more than, you know, almost 400 curated.
Andreas, can I make a quick comment here?
Yes, go ahead.
Get into it? I had referenced before the Jabberwocky quote from Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. And I love this diagram in Lithuania because I see that very much as the Jabberwocky poem. I have a great sense that there's meaning to it.
Right.
And I'm not really sure what it is. And when he translates it into English, I have the same kind of feeling. But I think it's incredibly neat, and I just love it. So
yeah, so it'll just be Jabberwocky
sorry.
2, right, and Jabberwocky 3. So very good introduction for context. But so what I do is, you know, for the last 45 years, you know, I think about things like, oh, you know, that there's only one way to divide everything into 4 perspectives or 2 perspectives or 3 perspectives, or I just look at examples and catalog, and then I start to notice these structures. So I have this dozens and dozens and dozens of structures that I'm familiar with and I could talk about empirically. But the question is like, well, where do they all come from? What makes sense? So I just kind of think about it theologically, like, well, how does this all evolve, you know, let's say from God, let's say, or our conception of God, and to what purpose? And so with regard to the reference problem, you kind of get one concept for free. So Jere sometimes talks about consciousness or, you know, whatever. It's like, you can say, well, you have one concept that is the undefined, so to speak. Okay, so it's just, you know, what does it mean to have the undefined, right? So you could have it be, and then you can have it function like God or whatever. So I start with God in the most kind of broadest sense. And then a key distinction is between a view and a perspective. So when you view things, it's a general thing, and different people can have the same view. And it's as if you're viewing on behalf of everybody. It's like you're seeing as opposed to watching. Like when you're watching something, you're taking up a particular perspective. You're looking at things in a particular direction. And it's really more about that perspective. And that perspective exists even if no one looks at it. So there's this kind of like you can have like a vantage point from which you're looking. You can have a perspective out onto some field of view. You can have a view that takes up that perspective. So the opposition is between like a perspective and the view that takes it up. So God is kind of like this, or the spirit is like this view that could inhabit anything and could be looking at anything, basically, if you just, offer it the perspective. The perspective is almost like if the view removes itself, then you're left with a structure that gives the direction in which the view was maybe viewing. So does that kind of distinction make sense? So you can have a chain of perspectives and you can have all these structural. So structure is in terms of perspectives. Like I can have, divide everything into 3 perspectives, but maybe no one's viewing it or somebody could view it, etc. But structurally, it's in terms of perspectives. You can have chains of perspectives. So for the 3 minds, it's very important. You could have no perspective, or you could have a perspective, or you could have a perspective on a perspective, or you could have a perspective on a perspective on a perspective. So that's one way to look at it. Now, the difference between human and God, human has like a limited perspective because human is in a, structure, a system, let's say. Human is in a system and you can't really get out of the system, right? You can't get out of yourself. But God is not bound by a system. God can go out of a system. So we really can't imagine God directly, but we're always looking through a limited human perspective. And so the most mature or complicated, let's say, or sophisticated would be the lost child problem. So like if a lost child is in the airport, they're lost, they don't see their parents, they shouldn't look for their parents because they'll just get more lost, but they should go where their parents would find them. So maybe they go to a police officer or they go to, they go somewhere to help, or just don't go anywhere, but just try to be as close to where you were. So that wisdom of the lost child is, and so žmogus means human, dievas means God, but it's like the human view of the God's view of the human view of God's view of the human view, or it's like the child's view of the parent's view of the child's view of the parent's view of the child's view is basically saying that the child imagines where the parents think the child would think that the parents would be looking for the child. Okay, that's what you should do. So it's very sophisticated, right? And so then it turns out, like in this direction, if you start with God and you look at how the structures unfold, you're adding the 3 minds. Okay, so you're going from unconscious to conscious to full-fledged consciousness. It's adding levels of reflection. It's adding more. And so God goes beyond God's self into human because God is challenging himself or herself, with regards to an investigation, like, is God necessary? Would there be God if God was not? So God says, well, let's just get rid of me. Let's get rid of the spirit. Let's get rid of the view and just have perspectives and see if anything can come from that. So you get this chain of perspectives. But human looking back, so human ends up being there like the investigator who's kind of like replacing God and now trying to figure out, well, is God necessary or not? And now for human to go beyond themselves, see, when God goes beyond himself or transcends himself, he has to remove himself and he has to go into himself because there's nowhere else to go. So that's how his self arises through creation. But human is already in somewhere. So human wants to climb out of that, go to system. So the way that human does that is you start with this full wisdom and then you kind of like strip away parts. So you have like 4 levels of understanding. There's understanding, self-understanding, shared understanding, and good understanding is like rapport, like with your parents, let's say. So for the will, you would have good understanding, and then for the heart, you would go to shared understanding, and for the mind, you would have like just self-understanding, and for the body, or just viscerally, you would have just try to God, human's view of God's view, like, so how human imagines God. And so these are these 2 directions. But now what the structures allow is for us to kind of like reconstruct what the theory would be for God. So like starting with God, how God goes beyond himself, he takes up a human's view, or she, and then how, let's say, she takes the human's view of God's view, which is what a human is, and then God's view of the human's view of the God's view of the human's view, and then God's view of the human's view of the God's view of the human's view of the God's view. That's basically like the human's God. So instead of just starting with a God who's basically vapid, you end up with a God who's challenged himself and demonstrated that God is necessary. And even in a godless world, humans will gravitate, and kind of dedicate themselves to connecting with God, with the human God, the God who actually loves and cares about humans. So this is kind of like the picture. And each one of these has like massive amounts of structural information that I could talk about, but maybe that's an initial picture. Does that kind of ring with anything or not?
Yeah, yeah. I I actually that made a lot of sense to me. Maybe because I have some context for more context for you, but um, that was very helpful. And how it relates to two things, I'll pull from Maxwell Ramstead's some of his writing. He writes about this duel between the free energy principle and the constrained
Hmm.
maximum entropy principle. The maximum entropy principle is kind of like the lost child. It's like you don't know anything, so
Hmm.
you have this view of nothing.
Hmm.
You there's no differentiation. It's just all flat. And then you have your goal of minimizing the variational free energy. So you have some like prior beliefs and a generative model and sensory information. And what you're trying to do is have a view of from nowhere and have a view of precisely what you think is happening.
Hmm.
And there's in the gap um, the direction.
Hmm.
So I kind that kind of
And so
that
all of
that kind of
these
landed.
all this metaphysical game is kind of like, how do you get something out of nothing? Like, or how do you get something for free? Well, so to get something for free is you just make the most of everything that is kind of built into us metaphysically. So like whether it's the three
Yeah.
minds, you can't run away from. So like the three minds, is something you get for free, or like the types of things that maximum entropy principle presumes, like you kind of strip aside, like you get to certain things that you can't really run away from in a metaphysical sense as opposed to a physical sense, right? So instead of saying
Or
physically we have to
yeah,
have this or that, but to say forget about physics, but just metaphysically, there's certain things you can't run away from and just focus on that part. That's more solid because the physics could change from planet to planet, maybe, but the metaphysics may not change. That's the bet. So,
yeah, and what you get for free is you do get to change your perspective. It's kind of related to my question about ergodicity
mhm,
because if you do have different perspectives available to you for free,
mhm,
um, and you switch in and out of those modes, it's going to reveal the variations between those different perspectives enough that you do extract some structure to inform the generative model. I'm sorry for putting it back into kind of completely free energy terms, but it seems like in free energy principle, you get to choose your perspective and you're not limited to one perspective. It is your free choice. And across those free
mhm.
choices, you can add up enough evidence or develop the prior belief or don't. I'm getting my language wrong. You're developing the generative model to be as close to what reality is as possible.
So just to maybe show what my ignorance or knowledge of ergodicity, but John Harlan knows a lot about that. So we talk about, in physics. But ergodicity basically says that in statistical phenomenon, like mechanics, statistical mechanical phenomenon, there's two ways of looking at things that generally are hold, where you can switch from one to the other. So one is that you can look at how you can look at the statistics of all the possible configurations, let's say, in phase space. So, like, what are all the possible things? And you can count that and study that, which is kind of like theoretically what you want to do. But in practice, what you get to do is you get to measure time evolution. So, how are things evolving in time? And because that's what's easier to measure, and you really don't have access to the configurations of the phase space typically, you want to be able to say that it's basically the same thing. So, like, there's two ways of looking at it, and you're able to switch from one to the other, let's say. So, Is that basically, am I on target or something like that?
That lands for me. There's an important part that I think is a constraint, is that, yeah, you don't get to visit all states of the phase space,
Hmm.
and therefore there is a limitation or a finite allocation of energy or
Hmm.
attention or time. And so therefore that's what for me always arises as the cost of thermodynamics.
Hmm.
It is that you don't have infinite computation on your finite body. So
Hmm.
therefore you have a limited set. You are constrained, and therefore you cannot explore the whole phase space. So you have to make hierarchical decisions on what to ignore and what
Hmm.
to include. And that's what helps you make relevant decisions for your goal. But I think your goal is this arbitrary slice or slant or decision that would reveal to you what model or what perspective you should choose. And then that gives rise to some level of morality, because and kind of an explanation or a will to beauty for that morality, because you have uncertainty in
Hmm.
I think this is all connected, but I like to bring in this ergodicity and non-ergodic concept, because I think it's a real physical constraint on the capability of exploring phase space.
Okay, Andre has to leave. Um, so he left. Montaigne?
You're on mute.
I'm interested. I do not entirely follow you. What you mean with morality within the active inference framework. Um, for me, the reference problem is solved in a specific way, in a role invariant reference function. And so I'm curious how your understanding of morality relates.
I have not really thought about morality. What I'm suggesting is that I think systems that can choose perspectives set up a goal, or have a teleology, have an end directedness, which between what that end is, they we create stories, we try to
Yes.
find evidence, or we have a, you know, if that goal is long term, then we need some level of getting us there. And sometimes it's a beautiful story.
Oh yes. Because generally this for me refers to epistemology. So what kind of model should we have of the world? And seemingly we are not we are allowed to even hallucinate certain hypotheses which don't even play out in the world. So there's like a choice, and there's not really a normative way. The free energy principle, so far as I understand, does not provide a normative way how model learning should happen. It's always based within a certain genetic model how it should update. Um, but I do believe that even for me, it is an epistemological question. And if you have questions, please do ask. Um,
I was just trying to think what I thought, where
uh,
I think a generative model has the possibility to generate all models if you allow it. So then you're not constrained on exploring the full space, but you are limited on your attention, time, and thermodynamic
Hmm.
capabilities. So that's the constraint. There's no limitation on possible generative models.
yeah.
So you would want to hallucinate in order to find the larger space. You would want a good imagination. You would want to dream. You would want to do psychedelics. You would want to make space for what is physically possible, which I think, like, you can make enough transformations to get anywhere, or you can
Yes.
create a belief that would motivate an action that is real, even though that physical, imaginative, like the purple pink elephant flying through the air isn't physically possible in our world right now, but it could be in a future scientific scenario. And so I just want to make space for that possibility,
Yeah.
because then I don't limit that exploration. I just say, well, I put 0 point infinite zeros 0.1 possibility on that happening, and so I can ignore it essentially if it matters.
Well,
Yes.
and so maybe to, as we conclude, maybe to speak to what Steph said, that it would be great if we all wrote a letter in the next 2 weeks. But one of the things to write about, of course, how we're doing, update us. But what are concepts that we'd like to try to include in shared reality or try to make more clear? I think Steph was basically offering ergodicity or non-ergodicity as things that we'd like to kind of, for our group, to try to see if we can agree on and make sense of it, to see if it's relevant, basically, right? Is that fair to? And then he related it, so helpfully related to saying, well, it's about systems that can choose perspective. And also, I think, the ability to have teleology, let's say, to have some kind of goal orientation. So whether or not that's true, and also, it's one thing to worry about keeping an open mind and having all these possibilities. It's another thing to worry about the integrity of your mind. So if you lose the integrity of your mind, or you just kind of then it's not really, if you have integrity of mind, you don't need to do that much exploring in a certain sense. So it could be, it could be argued, if you're taking, having to take psychological drugs in a certain sense it's kind of like giving up and saying I wasn't able to do it with my mind alone, right? And if I wasn't able to do it with my mind alone, then what do I think I'm going to discover by doing that, right? It's kind of we're believing in extraterrestrials or whatever it is. Okay, but what does that actually change? Montijn.
So I'm very curious because I do really think it's an epistemological question, but it's still very important because it's the epistemology matters not necessarily whether a reason to act is moral or not, but rather whether the moral is free or not. So what the free moral is, that's because the moral is defined by a role invariant preference function in active inference framework, and a free belief. So what the underlying state and transition probabilities are, which generate these expected outcomes, that also has a functional characterization, just like the preference function, which is doubt invariance. And that doubt invariance is kind of this test to which we can see whether we have aligned our model the best we can do with the generative process. And one of the key aspects is that we share this reality. We share the same kind of reality, so the same kind of generative process out there. And so one of these key markers that we have a certain hypothesis space which actually overlaps with the real world is shareability. That we're able to maintain the same kind of hypothesis spaces. And a lot of times, because we refer to the hypothesis space, not to the word, because we can talk about love, but have radical different hypothesis spaces which produce that word. But we really mean we have the same kind of hypothesis. Our brains are able to synchronize on the same kind of hypothesis spaces. And I think that doubt invariance is really a test, and also has to do with that I'm still struggling a bit, but I would like to talk with you about that because I really think the discussion is going about the main question is, how can we ensure that our generative model is as much in line with the generative process as possible? And I think there's doubt invariance, which is nothing more than that we are able to it makes use that we are able to have we're able to downweight the complexity term. We are able to translate our priors into recalled observations so that we can go fully accuracy. That is essentially.
Okay, so we have to end now. So why don't we just?
Steph says we don't need to close the Zoom space, but you can, if you want, end this, or people want to leave.
Why don't we end? And I'll just say a prayer just to thank everybody and to say thank you for thinking in parallel. Let's continue working in parallel. Peace and love.
Peace.
Okay, thank you.